Good morning, LifeGate. If you guys want to stay standing for the reading of the word, my name is Kenzie King, and I serve here at LifeGate on the creative team. Hey. Today's scripture is going to be from Philippians 1:27 through 30. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you, that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had and now still have. This is the word of the Lord. You guys may be seated.
Good morning, LifeGate. My name is Liz, and I'm one of the pastors here at LifeGate, and what an honor it is to be with you this morning. It is a true gift and a joy to get to serve here, to get to serve this community, to learn and to grow with this leadership team here. I love getting to learn from Pastor Narup. He's one of the best communicators, but truly one of the best pastors I've ever met. And so each and every week, I feel like I learn something new from him, particularly when it comes to preaching. But there's one area that I just don't think he's ever gonna be able to teach me. And it's not because he's not a good teacher, it's because my voice can't keep up. The way that he can move from a teaching point into a beautiful melody, I just can't hang when it comes to that. I think that when I meet Jesus, that the first thing he's gonna redeem is probably my pride, but then after that, it's gonna be my voice. I'm gonna sing with the angels, and I can't wait for that day because I love music. And I particularly love music that makes you feel something. Are you with me this morning? Do you like music that really gets inside your bones and makes you feel something? One of my favorite artists right now is this guy by the name of Noah Kahan. And this guy, yeah, a couple of you like him. This guy, he feels things, and you know by his lyrics. He has some silly ones like I'm mean because I grew up in New England, and I love that because I'm like, Noah, I get it. I grew up in New England. I'm mean too. This is where the cold comes. We were raised on little light, but all of his songs have this torment to them. And some of them are sort of your classic heartbreak songs, but some of them kind of exude this heaviness. And when I was growing up, these sort of dark songs, they were for the fringe people, for the real emo types. Do I have any former emo kids out there? Come on, a couple of you. Yeah, I know it. But now it feels like it's everywhere. And I think this is a shift that we're beginning to see in culture where we feel this weight, where we feel this sense of defeat. And so as we enter week 5 of our series, the title today is Anchored in Victory. And my hope as we exegete this text is to encourage us in our identity in the Lord and to allow us to understand what it means to live as a people of victory in a dissatisfied world. If you are a believer walking into this room today, it is a picture of what life in the kingdom truly looks like. And if you are here this morning and not yet a follower of Jesus, maybe you've been invited here by a friend or a coworker, maybe you're curious about who Jesus is, welcome. We're so glad that you came into this space this morning, and I believe that this morning there's an invitation for you, an invitation toward hope. And I want us to all be encouraged in hope because we are a people prone to disappointment. In fact, a study that came out this year out of the UC Berkeley polled voters 18 to 43, Gen Z and millennial voters. And what it found is there's a rising belief that the government is dysfunctional, is broken, and ultimately is incapable of addressing the critical challenges that we face in America today. But alongside this belief that the government is incapable of addressing challenges, they saw a desire for the government to create change in our country. And so what this fuels, this cycle where they're believing in something that they know to be incapable of making any change, it's fueling this fatalism, this extreme sense of defeat because they're placing their hope in a system that they know to be broken. Misplaced hope always brings disappointment. Misplaced hope always brings discouragement. Isn't that true for you and I? We place our hope in things of this world, in the circumstances around us. And we may be satisfied for a while. We may experience peace for a while, but then something changes and we're dissatisfied yet again. We place our hope for meaning and for purpose in the work that we do. And when it's going well, when we're moving up and to the right in our career, it feels good. Then something happens and we lose a job we never thought we'd lose. Our company takes a turn for the worse. And suddenly we're dissatisfied, we're discontent, we're disappointed. We put our hope in our relationships in building a family, having a good marriage. And it's good for a while. Then you face difficult tensions within your marriage. Then your kids walk away from the Lord. And all of a sudden, the thing that you thought was so stable is leaving you dissatisfied, discouraged. But the truth for us today is that the Lord meets us, a discouraged people, in Philippians. But now, He doesn't just meet us, He meets the Philippian church first. And so as we study scripture, our biblical hermeneutic is important. The way that we study the Bible matters because it's easy for us to just jump directly into what does this mean for me? How do I apply this to my life? And it applies to your life, don't you worry. But it can't mean what it never meant. And so today we're going to explore what it meant. And so where we enter our story is a guy named Paul, a preacher, a church planter, an apostle, moving throughout the Roman Empire, put in prison. And he's in Rome, in chains for the sake of the gospel, put there for preaching Jesus. And he's writing to this church, the Philippian church, this growing community of believers that Paul loves. And what happens when this community of believers grows in their faith? They start to experience persecution. They start to experience obstacles and they get discouraged. Because this so often is what happens as we grow in our faith. When we first come to know the Lord, most of the things that we bring to Him, most of the things that we say, Lord, I have to submit this to you, are the destructive things in our lives. The patterns, the behaviors, the habits, the things that are destroying us, whether it's internally or externally, physically or spiritually. But then as we continue to journey with the Lord, at some point along the way, it's fewer and fewer destructive things and more disappointments, discouragements. These are the things that we have to submit to the Lord. And so today, I hope that we can be encouraged as we choose to submit our disappointment to King Jesus. Because the problem for most of us is that when we are discouraged, we don't just stay there in this low-level discouragement. We doom spiral. Is anybody with me this morning? We spiral, and suddenly when we go from stubbing our toe to the only logical outcome in our lives will be that we end up on a glacier floating through the middle of the ocean and with no money to our names. And I don't know how we got there, but it was logical in my mind, and that's the only option. Have you ever experienced a doom spiral where in our discouragement, we don't know where to put our hope? In our discouragement, we don't know what to do or where to turn, and so we live in fear. We live from a place of defeat. And now Paul's temptation as he's in prison could be to put his hope in the empire, to just assume that maybe this Jesus thing didn't work out. I'm in prison, so it can't be that great. But Paul is encouraging the Philippian church in times of discouragement, in times of trial, to live from a place of victory. So what is Paul's imperative? We go to the text today. He says, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. This is Paul's first command in this whole chapter. All of chapter 1 is him just setting up the story, telling the Philippians what's going on in Rome, what's happening with them, what's happening with him. And now he finally turns and he says, so this is what you have to do. He says, only. He says, just one thing. If you do nothing else, do this one thing. And he says, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel. And now in this translation, we miss something here, because if you read the NLT or the CSB, it says, live as citizens. It says, as citizens of heaven, live a life worthy of the gospel. And that idea of citizenship that comes through in the Greek is really important, because this was a big deal in Rome. Citizenship mattered there because it gave you access, it gave you privilege, it gave you a place in society. And so Roman citizenship was something to be coveted. But what Paul is saying is that there's a difference between Roman citizenship and the benefits of that and heavenly citizenship. And so Paul is calling us to something greater than just simply the empire. Paul is calling us to something that is of a different kingdom. And he's clarifying that there is a difference. Sometimes heavenly citizenship and earthly citizenship will align. You will be a really good citizen of whatever country that you are in to a certain point if you are a good heavenly citizen, following laws, doing things that are good and right for the good and the flourishing of humanity. But there will be a time when these things begin to clash, when the values of the empire come in conflict with the values of the kingdom. And this is what Paul was experiencing, an empire that didn't value Jesus or the cross. And so this is the time where Paul is encouraging the Philippian church to stand for the kingdom of heaven and not simply the kingdom here on earth. And so what is his encouragement? We continue on. He says, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you, that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. Paul begins this and he says, I want you to do this whether I'm with you or not. He is a classic coach doing a really good training model. He says, you've already seen me do it. I've already helped you do it. I've already watched you while you're doing it, and now you're on your own. It's your turn to own your faith. It's your turn to walk in the way of Jesus without me holding your hand, so that whether I'm here or not, you can follow Jesus. You can live in the midst of this suffering, in the midst of these difficult circumstances. But he doesn't just leave us out to do it on our own. He doesn't say that because you have to do it whether I'm there or not, you have to do it alone. What does he say? He says, do it in one mind, with one spirit. This is Paul's first allusion to the unity that he continues to talk about over and over and over again. Paul is asking the church in Philippi to be unified, to act and operate as if they were of one soul. Being of one soul means they are moving in step with each other. Their whole experience, the very core of their being, is unified together. Because what Paul is saying is that if unity is broken, then the mission is broken. And so for you and I today, unity does not mean That we come into this place and we say, man, I just don't really like the music, so maybe I'll just go to a different place. Unity is saying, I submit my preferences under the mission of God. Unity isn't saying that I come in and I don't really like her personality, and so we probably just shouldn't be friends. Like, there are lots of people I can be friends with. Unity is submitting what I feel, my comfort, under the purposes and the mission of God. This is what he is asking of you and I today is for us to submit under the mission and the purpose of God so that we can see Jesus glorified. We are in this together. When I was in 7th grade, I played basketball, standing tall I was the same height in 7th grade, so I was much better then than I am now. Unfortunately, my career ended quite quickly after that. But I had this coach in 7th grade, her name was Carrie Larrabee, and every time anyone wore jewelry to practice, it was a big no-no. We all got in trouble. Everybody got on the line. Everybody had to run sprints. It was way worse if it was everybody but you, if you were the one wearing jewelry. That was was really, really painful. But it's this beautiful picture of what it means to be a part of a team. In Coach Carter, which is a great basketball movie, and Channing Tatum's probably best line he's ever spoken in a movie, he's talking about being a part of a team, and he says, Coach, you said we're a team. If one person struggles, we all struggle. If one person triumphs, we all triumph. This is the Christian life. If one person struggles, we all struggle. If one person triumphs, we all triumph. Together is the only way that we can live a life worthy of the gospel. And Paul goes on to describe this life throughout the rest of these verses here that we see on the screen. And he uses this military language, this athletic language. And he's bringing a point to the fact that living a life worthy of the gospel is not easy. Living a life worthy of the gospel is not just simply walking out your front door and you'll just experience it. It is a battle. There is a fight that we are waging. And so what are the 3 things that Paul says a life worthy of the gospel is defined by? First, we stand firm. This again is this military type language. It would have brought to mind this idea of a Roman legion of soldiers, this mass unit standing together. But the thing about this is they weren't just standing around. He's not asking them to just stand around and be in the same place as each other. To stand firm is to actively resist the enemy. There's a persistence and a perseverance that comes with standing firm. And so when we come into this place and we are standing firm together, it's not simply saying, I'm not gonna engage in sin. There's an active resistance to it. And so when we say, I won't gossip. But if we stand allowing gossip to exist around us, we are not standing firm. We have to create spaces in our lives, in our homes, where things that are not of Jesus will not be tolerated. Where things that are not of Jesus will not become the culture. We have to fight to actively resist the effects of sin on our lives. We have to fight to actively resist the lies from the enemy, the things in our minds that the enemy is speaking to us that just aren't true, the things he's saying to discourage you. We don't just say, I know that God is good. We have to believe that the lies from the enemy are not true and actively fight against them, replacing them with God's truth in our lives. We stand firm. But then Paul asks us to strive on. He says, I hope that you will be striving side by side for the faith. And now don't hear what I'm not saying. He's not asking us to earn anything. Paul is not saying you have to earn God's love or his attention. You have to earn his affection. What Paul is saying is that we will contend for the faith. Paul is saying that if you are here in this room and you are breathing, that he has a purpose and a mission for your life. When he says strive on, he says contend for the gospel, because this is the reason that you're here. This is a reason that we come into this space and gather together to be a sign that God is working and moving. And you have a part to play in that. There is a conflict in our world between the values of the kingdom and the values of heaven. And so our job as citizens of heaven is to contend for the values of the kingdom. He's asking us to do whatever it takes. To do whatever it takes to see Jesus on display. And so as you sit here today, do whatever it takes in your marriage to see Jesus on display. Fight for each other. Fight to keep Christ at the center. Do whatever it takes. In your singleness, fight to redeem the time, to make the most of every opportunity. Do whatever it takes when you're raising your children. Do whatever it takes. Put Jesus on the throne, and not sports, not school. Put Jesus on the throne. We do whatever it takes to see the gospel come into life, to see the gospel advance and the name of Jesus be lifted high. And then Paul finally says, a life worthy of the gospel is not frightened in anything by your opponents. Paul says, fear nothing, which means there's something to fear. There's a real enemy, a real opponent that we are facing in this, but it's not who we often think it is. It's not the person sitting next to us. The real enemy is who Paul tells us about in Ephesians 6, the powers and authorities, the principalities and rulers in the spiritual forces. The enemy is real. But church, we do not have to fear the enemy, because although he can discourage you, he cannot harm you. Matthew 10:28 says, why do we fear the one who can only kill the body? There's encouragement in knowing that although you might be disappointed in your circumstances, Jesus is creating a way to salvation for you. And so we refuse intimidation. We refuse to be put off the mission because of fear. This, friends, this is what a life worthy of the gospel looks like. It's one where we stand firm, it's one where we strive on, and it's one where we fear nothing. And in our culture today, all of this sort of military language is a little bit taboo. We don't like the kinds of language that leads us to things that happen like the Crusades and the Inquisitions. This is where Christians got in a lot of hot water by using this kind of violent language. But when we understand it for what it truly is, this is not the conclusion that we come to. Because when we hear this military language, Paul's model for what it looks like to stand firm, to strive on, and to fear nothing is the cross. Paul's pattern is Jesus. And so when we look to Jesus, Jesus was not violent in any way. Jesus was not manipulative or deceitful or even forceful. Jesus was a humble king. Jesus was one who stood firm. He actively resisted sin. When he was tempted in the wilderness, he did not bow to temptation. When he was wrongfully accused, he didn't even defend himself. He would not let sin come near him. He actively, non-violently resisted sin. He was striving for the gospel to be made known. He did whatever it took. He was rejected, cast out, beaten even. And yet, he did whatever it took for the gospel, and he feared nothing, not even death. This is the reason that Jesus went to the cross. Because this is the picture of a life worthy of the gospel, one modeled after a humble king, a servant king, who comes and lays his life down for the sake of the gospel. And so Paul says this life worthy of the gospel, he says, this will be a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. What we see here is a theologically dense sentiment. It has both present and future implications. The eschatology, the end times of what he's talking about is destruction. But he's not talking about destruction of your opponents who are your boss, or the guy who keeps calling the HOA on you because your grass is just a little too long. He's talking about the enemies of King Jesus. He's talking about people who are opposed to God, the spiritual forces, the enemy who is opposed to God. And the beautiful thing about this being a future reality is that at one time we were all at enmity with God. But God broke down the dividing wall of hostility and made a way for us to experience him. And so he does this at the end of time so that we might have the chance, have the opportunity to choose salvation, to step into this life in the kingdom. We can choose to walk with Jesus. And when we do, this becomes a sign of our salvation. And that has Christological implications about who Jesus is, about what his nature is, and that matters for your today, not just your future, not just at the end of all things, not just when you get to heaven. It matters today, here and now, because if Jesus is bringing you salvation, he is actively working and moving in your story. He is for you. He is with you. Do you believe that this morning, that Jesus is with you? That as you sit in the financial trouble that it feels like you're never going to climb out of, he is with you. That as your children have walked away from the Lord and you are wondering if the Lord would ever bring them back, he is for you. He is working. The reality is that Jesus and the salvation that he has for you is both for today, tomorrow, and for all time. And this is what a worthy life is. But now, church, how do we do this? This is a tall order, and I don't know about you, but I don't think I can accomplish this on my own. I don't think I can stand firm on my own. I don't think I can strive on in my strength. I fear a lot of things when it comes to my personality. He goes on in verse 29, and he says, "For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had and now hear that I still have." Let's start at the end of that. Verse 29, or verse 30. He says it's the same conflict. It's the same story over and over and over again. He says, what we talked about before is still true now. Life is still hard. Life was hard then, and it's hard now. This is the reality of human existence, is that life is hard and messy. And so why are you surprised that you're walking into suffering? Why are you surprised that that friend walked away from you? Why are you surprised that it's difficult to live the Christian life in a world that is counter to the values of heaven? But he says, here's the way. In verse 29, he shows us the way. He says, first, you believe. The way to live a life worthy of the gospel is that you believe, which means that we trust him for that salvation. We trust that he is actually near to us. We trust that he's actually on the way to making all things right, to wiping every tear away, to undoing every scheme of the enemy. And then we give our allegiance to him. We say that I'm on mission for Jesus, that the purpose that he has for my life is to glorify God. And then we suffer for the sake of Christ. The pagans of the time, they believed that suffering just simply happened. It was by fate, it was by chance. But what Paul is telling us in this text is that suffering is for the sake of Christ, which means that your suffering here and now is redemptive work. You're actually doing the work of the kingdom by remaining faithful in suffering. That matters. We all live these lives where we want to do good kingdom work. But then suffering comes around and we're like, oh, but maybe not that kind of kingdom work. I like the kingdom work that feels comfortable. But suffering is redemptive work. Every time you experience the pain and the brokenness of this world and choose to follow Jesus in the midst of it, you are building his kingdom here and now. You are setting a standard that is not prone to move based on your preferences, based on your feelings. You are setting a standard that is built on Jesus and only Jesus. There's this beautiful moment in Prince Caspian where the Chronicles of Narnia, where Susan, the oldest sister, who has gotten to this place where she doesn't really want to believe in Aslan. She doesn't really want to believe that he's around, that he's working, because it feels a little bit embarrassing. That's kid stuff. But Lucy continues, the younger sister continues to tell her, he's here, he's moving, he's working. Aslan is on the move. And she says, no, he's not. But then when she finally sees Aslan face to face, with not an ounce of condemnation, not even a bit of disappointment, he says this to her. He says, you have listened to fears, child. Come, let me breathe on you. Forget them. Are you brave again? For many of us in this place, we're disappointed. We are living in these cycles of disappointment, and it feels almost foolish to follow God. It feels like that's kid stuff, trusting in this thing in the sky. But practically, I'm the one who has to do it, right? You are believing the fears this morning. You're living from a place of defeat. Let him breathe on you, because misplaced hope, it will always disappoint us. And life is full of enough disappointments, big and small. I was commiserating with a friend this week who is getting her family portraits done. And when you have all adult children, it's kind of fun to be able to get to do lots of different, combinations of people. You get to see different people together, grandma and grandpa and all the kids. You get to see different couples. And when you're the single one in the family, it's super awkward. Because you get to this place where it's like, okay, mom and dad are in the front. And then, my sister's family is here with all her 7 kids. My brother's family is over here with his 5. And then, all the other couples and kids. And then I'm just standing in the back like, hey guys, hey, it's me right here. And you feel the pangs of disappointment. Like, shoot, this isn't what I expected. Do you feel that this morning? Is there a place in your life where you're like, this isn't what I expected? I look around and you are living the dream that I've always wanted. I look around and it feels like God sees you and not me. We are letting the fear and the defeat be the place that we are operating out of. But friends, there is a way to hope. We see it in Romans 5. In Romans 5, Paul says, I rejoice in suffering. Why? Because I know that suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. And character, it produces hope. And that hope will not disappoint. So the way to hope, guess what? It goes through the door of suffering. This is a painful reality. But church, the truth of the matter for you and I is that living from victory is the hope of the Christian life. And we live from victory even in the midst of suffering. You can find hope in this reality. You can find hope knowing that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is on the throne, that the victory has already been won. This morning, I believe that there are people in this room who are carrying hopelessness. I believe that there are people in this room living from a place of defeat. And I believe you have the best of intentions with it. I think that you believe your fear is comfortable. Maybe this morning you actually think that by not hoping, you're doing God a favor. Because then you won't be disappointed in him. Been single for so long, if I just never hope to get married, then God, you won't disappoint me. My marriage is so broken that if it never gets restored, I don't have to put my hope in that, so you won't disappoint me. What are the places in your life where you can't get your hopes up? What are the fears that you are holding on to because it feels like you can control something if you just hold them close to you? Today, the Lord is asking you, maybe even compelling you this morning to submit those fears to him, to call on his name, to say that Jesus, you are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And guess what? Fear doesn't get to sit on the throne. Guess what? Anxiety doesn't get to sit on the throne. Guess what? The enemy doesn't get to sit on the throne. Discouragement, it doesn't get a place. Disappointment doesn't get a place. Because Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And we, church, we can be anchored in victory. The victory comes that knowing that he has made a way for us. Pick up victory. Take on the new identity. Put away the lies of the enemy. The opponent is real, but he cannot harm you. In Jesus and Jesus alone, you can experience victory. And so today, let us set aside the disappointment. Let us set aside the discouragement, and let us claim the victory that comes only from being near to Jesus.